I want to explain something that this time is intended to be a physical expression of healing that we use rather than some of the ethereal mind stuff that we often go into, especially Patricia and I, when we're working on a particular issue that we want to try and help people move through. There's a lot of it that's mental, but this time is designed to be physical. And in my enthusiasm, I am so excited about this new concept because frankly, Patricia and I have been doing this without even realizing why it was so effective. And now we have the data and the understanding of why some of the things that we have been alluding to and pushing for, and the cornerstones for the art of recovery, for instance, are all under this whole purview and this whole concept of really being able to focus and change your neural pathways. Okay. So one of the first things that we need to do, I want to explain this so that we can understand why we're doing it. Some of you may understand the process and the concept and maybe even have done it before. It's called brain training. That's what I call it. 5 minutes of brain training. And it's not the most exciting 5 minutes of your life, nor is it actually the most comfortable. And according to everything I'm hearing, one of the reasons for the discomfort when our mind is racing or when we're feeling something that we want to do instead of whatever it is we're doing, that's actually helpful for neuroplasticity. And in understanding the concepts of neuroplasticity, when I was growing up, we didn't think that our brains could change, that everything was finite after age 5. Everything that happened was whatever we learned in the first 5 years was the basis for our brain. And anything after that was just how we lived our lives. But the fact is, there's a ton of research that has shown that we can actually change the neural pathways with which we process things. So if you think about your knee-jerk reactions for when you're triggered or traumas, every time you face plant in the kitchen, every time you make a move or want to make a move toward food, you're using your original neural pathways or the neural pathways that you have strengthened over many decades. Okay. There's a lot of stuff, the technical side of it, I don't need to go into today because I want to make sure we stay with our time frame of 30 minutes. So this neuroplasticity is the cornerstone for healing and making lasting change. And there are different ways that it works and different ways that it doesn't. There's a lot of people that say, for instance, every time we're in a class like this, we change. Every time that you go running, you're changing your neural pathways. That actually isn't true. There's a focused process that's required in order for things to actually make a shift. In other words, if you are not aware of the reasons or the underlying reasons, or even the fact that you're face planting, if you're not aware of it, I know for myself, for 30 plus, 40 plus years, I did things I didn't even notice I was doing around food. I would mindlessly eat an entire bag of something, and I didn't even notice it. But now, after we've recognized with abstinence generally is how we start to notice, oh, wow, I'm doing this thing and I don't like doing it. And I don't know why I'm doing it. And I'm ashamed of it. So this idea that we have created these neural pathways, which is what has happened. We've created those neural pathways, and now we want to make a change. But how do we do that? And how does it stick? Because how many of us have gone through a food plan and then I don't understand it. I was good for several days or several weeks or several months or several years, and now I'm not. So these neural pathways that are deep and ingrained are the ones that we want to work on. And it's not something that gets changed overnight. But when we have this beautiful focus, when we have this beautiful capacity for the focus, that's where we can actually make this shift. And that's why it's so interesting. So what I want to do first, in order for us to focus, We want to look at something. And since you're talking about looking at my screen right now, I want you to look at your screen and focus on something. You can focus on yourself, or you can focus on, I want you to keep a small window of focus and use soft eyes. And we're going to do 5 minutes of brain training. So if you don't want to stare at yourself for 5 minutes, maybe stare at the cute little dot in the corner or something. Okay. Or somebody else on the screen. We're going to sit for 5 minutes. And what we want to do, this is the concept behind this not moving for 5 minutes, is actually training you to be able to resist. It seems counter, but what you're basically doing is you're sitting. It will also help you with procrastination. So when you sit for 5 minutes, I don't want you to move. I don't want you to scratch. I don't want you to itch. I don't want you to wiggle. I don't want you to go get a blanket. I don't want you to do anything but sit and breathe. You're not going to listen to anything in particular. Did you have a question, Marcia?
No, I'm just cold.
Oh, yes. So here's my little trick, as I've been doing brain training for a while now. What you want to do is make sure that you're as comfortable as possible, because what I've done in the past is sit on my little meditation block and it stretches out my hips. That's great. But if I cross my legs on my hardwood floors, my ankles get really painful after just 30 seconds or so. So you want to get into a comfortable position, so that, because we want to really try not to move. Even if you have something to scratch, even if you have something to itch, this is your work to hyper focus on not moving and not scratching and not itching. You got me? So the other thing that I like to do is straw breathing at the same time. So straw breathing for me is inhaling quickly and exhaling slowly. All right. So I like to do that because it helps me count the 5 minutes, because some people have accused me of not paying attention and not setting a timer. Sometimes the 5 minutes feels like an eternity.
But if you're doing straw breathing, you're moving.
Not
Right. That's what I was just going to say.
okay. Okay. That's true, but we do have to breathe, don't we? And our heart has to move and our blood has to pump. So for me, the straw breathing is inhaling quickly. Okay, I don't consider that. And you can if you want to. If you don't feel comfortable with that, for me, is my resisting everything else, because I itch a lot. I do a lot of itching. And there's parts of me, I'm a fidgeter, right? See, I just scratched my chin. There's parts of me that, so I don't consider the straw breathing, but I understand why you would. But for me, I do the straw breathing for a few reasons. It helps me count, because I know that I have about 4 straw breaths in a minute, and it helps me count. So I don't feel like I'm going to go nuts if the 5 minutes isn't over. But this is a focused exercise, guys. And what you're doing is you're going to be looking at a particular thing in the screen, or you want to focus, you want a tunnel vision. Okay. And you're going to do whatever you need to do. I like to do the straw breathing for 5 minutes. And then we're going to come up and I'm going to talk some more about the other parts of this process that are so cool. All right. All right. We're going to get started now. And time. All right. You can do this for 30 seconds before you want to focus on something in particular. This can help very much in changing your neural pathways. So right now, the chances are higher that you're focused on what you're hearing. So I want you to hear something. You cannot notice something is wrong until you're aware of it. That makes any sense. You have to be able to open up the processes that you're going through in order for you to see this. So for instance, like I mentioned earlier, 33 decades, 30 years plus, 40 years plus of me, I don't even know how old I am, 50 years plus of me eating massive amounts of food without even noticing it is the unawareness that I had. Once I was abstinent for even a short amount of time, I recognized that this thing was not helpful to me and that this thing was I was doing unconsciously. But once you're conscious of it, that's the first step. So being aware and noticing is the first step. It can be frustrating to notice and not be able to do something about it. And that frustration is what causes us to keep spiraling back to the food. We get mad at ourselves. What? I know better. I shouldn't be doing this. I'm watching myself do this. We get very angry with ourselves. And that in itself causes us to spiral down because we're riddled with shame and guilt. So the first process is the noticing and sitting in it and recognizing what it is we're doing. And in this focused state, let me share my screen here with
There he is.
Old Dog's New Tricks, the science behind why you absolutely will change. Very rarely do I hear scientists say that. Ever heard that old saying about not being able to teach an old dog new tricks? Science has some news for you. That dog just needs the right training program. Your brain, not exactly a spring chicken, but still pretty amazing, makes these changes. We do not create new neural pathways. We readjust the old ones. Okay, so the old pathways are important. So the first thing that we have to do is the aha moment, the realization. Look at me, I'm doing this. Look at me, I'm doing this again and again and again. It's really important to recognize that moment and to honor it. That noticing is super important. But why, though? We need to have a strong whys list. How many times have I mentioned this? We need to have a strong reason for why we want to make this change. Something is untenable, something is too hard, something is super messy. I can't stand it. We need to have a strong whys list. And then we need to be able to focus in order for us to make this change. And that's why the brain training is so helpful. And no, you don't need a gym membership to do that. I don't know how you all felt after that, but every time you do the brain training, you're learning how to not procrastinate and how to resist. It's a combination. It's a beautiful gift. And using the brain training in advance of something that you want to really focus on is a real help. When your brain says no, when you're starting down that piece of NF, not food, that's not on your plan, your brain might start throwing a toddler temper tantrum. So you want to pause, take 3 breaths, get curious, and remember that this amount of awareness is your brain doing push-ups. So that frustration in itself is important for you to recognize. It's different. I never used to feel that way after a bag. I would always want to grab another bag. This is a different space. You're in a different space. So this is important because when we can practice this process of noticing and focusing on a particular thing that we want to shift. So Patricia and I have this really beautiful course that many of you are already in that starts in January. But this particular course is designed to help you with the cornerstones required to make those lasting changes. And we didn't even realize that this was such a clear neural pathway, although we've seen amazing shifts with people since they've been starting this process of just noticing and just sitting in the stuff. At some point, you're going to be able to walk back the cat, which is our first class actually, and move over to the underlying reasons that you did decide to go to this food. Yes, you made a brain choice. Your brain neurologically was set up to solve this problem because you were triggered by something. There was a trauma, there was an issue, there was something that reminded you of something else, and your brain went back to the same old neural pathways. And in this process of noticing and pausing and focusing, you can make this lasting change. You need a strong wise list, you need a strong motivator, and the last little function is sleep. The overnight brain renovation makes a big, big difference. And it doesn't have to be even overnight. You can do this even just in a good nap. It can make a huge difference in the healing of those neural pathways. You're on mute, Marcia.
Where will I find what you just read?
On my blog. So you go to transformwithsonia.com and you go to blogs, and it's the latest one.
Thank you.
And there's also another really important, if you want to listen to a podcast, it's a YouTube podcast that Andrew Huberman's latest. It's 33 minutes. It's fantastic. Patricia and I and Litzy just got done listening to it. Again, I've listened to it 4 or 5 times. And
That's just because he's eye candy.
Thanks, Liz. I value that.
He is. You are correct. You are correct.
That's
How
a
do you-
good reason to watch it.
How do you
Absolutely.
spell, how do you spell Huberman?
Huberman.
Okay.
I'm going to put the link in here and I will also share it far and wide. But it's quite amazing. Here's the link for the specific podcast. It's called How to Focus to Change Your Brain. But what Andrew Huberman has been an icon for me for a couple of years now. I've been using his work in a lot of different ways. He has a lot of different podcasts on the brain and how the brain physiologically works, and all of the different aspects, from metabolism to like I said, focus, to a huge number. He interviews someone weekly, and now he's doing this second podcast every week that's shorter. Most of his podcasts are 2+ hours. I've learned about different ways of energizing. He interviews a ton of different people that have become also mainstays for me as well. So he's opened up doors for me in many ways as far as neuroscience is concerned, and brain science and addiction. So to be clear, we need to focus. We need to, and that focus does not need to be this 5 minutes of brain training. It can literally be awareness. Oh my gosh, I just wanted to do this thing. You don't even have to have done it. You just wanted to do something that you knew was counter to who you are, counter to your current self. And that focus, that awareness leads to the focus of, why do I not want to do this? And why do I want to change this? And that concept helps over time. And that's why the noticing is such an integral part of this course that Patricia and I are teaching. It's an amazing opportunity to get into the underlying muscles and the neuroscience of this shift. There's obviously spiritual components because Patricia is Patricia. And there's also, for both of us, this awareness. We didn't even realize that these things were so helpful in the process of this thing. We just knew they worked. We didn't know why, but this is now showing why they work. So again, awareness, noticing that you have a problem, noticing you have an issue, noticing you're disconnected, noticing you're discomforted. Something's uncomfortable and it doesn't fit anymore. And we want it changed. And the beginning is the awareness. And then you move to a focused look. And like I said, our first class is on walking back the cat, to learn the process of moving back in time to understand, what was it that triggered me to want to do this thing? Is it a behavioral component? Is it an emotional situation? Does it remind me of something when I was 3? What is it exactly that's causing me to want to eat? You don't even have to eat. We all know what it's like to have that craving and that feeling like, oh my God, I got to distract myself right now because I do not want to eat. But I didn't have that capacity to even make a pause 10 years ago. I didn't have that. I do now. And it's because of this science. So, any questions?
When you mentioned sleep, are you talking about within the period of you're doing this little exercise to have a nap?
No, but you can. What happens, as far as I understand it, he's doing definitely cliff notes in this situation. It's the Amazon jungle. How some people say that you have to keep the forest keeps taking over any kind of road or any kind of path that you create unless you keep working it. This is what I think is happening with our neural pathways. We need to keep working them in order for them to stay ingrained, but good sleep helps tremendously. He calls it NSDR, which is non-sleep deep resonance, I think is what it's called. NSDR, I'm not sure what, but it's a good nap. So it's another way. But the fact is, if you're not getting good sleep, you may really struggle with shifting your neural pathways.
Can you close your eyes while you're doing the 5 minutes?
Yes, as a matter of fact, if you want to learn auditorially, that's the way you want to do it. So yes, the closing your eyes is fine. The point of this is to have focused attention. If you're reading, if you're looking at something, and in this case, the reason I suggested keeping your eyes open is you were going to be watching me and hearing me talk. And that's the reason for the visual. But for auditory, it's absolutely fine. And it is really, the 5 minutes of brain training works in a bunch of different ways. First of all, it's calming and centering. It's giving you that discomfort that you feel sometimes when you're sitting in those 5 minutes. I can't imagine anybody didn't have that same issue that I had. I don't care how many times you do this, that discomfort is actually helpful. It's actually letting you know that there's stuff going on in here. My norepinephrines are activated and they're doing this business. And that's the beginnings of learning. That's the beginnings of neural pathway shifting. So that 5 minutes, it can help with restriction as far as not wanting to do something. Okay, I'm not going to scratch. I've managed to figure out that I cannot do this thing for 5 minutes. It helps us strengthen that part of our brain. And then the other part about procrastinating, it actually helps to not procrastinate. It's crazy. It's been extremely helpful for me. I've been doing it, well, since it was introduced in a book that I read by Kelly McGonigal called The Willpower something. Kelly McGonigal's book was the basis for a course that I taught a year and a half ago. And in there, she talks about this particular facet, which is brain training. So that's where I started doing it. And I find it to be extremely helpful in calming my ADHD brain. Yeah, go ahead, Mary Beth.
Oh, would that be helpful, excuse me, to do if you were having a craving?
Yes. Anything that you can do to pause after a craving is helpful because usually a craving is accompanied by our prefrontal cortex going offline, which is why it's harder which is why we feel like we're just watching ourselves do this thing rather than having any control, because our prefrontal cortex is our control mechanism. Our amygdala is our part of our lizard brain that has taken over. For some reason, which is what we get to work on, we have this underlying reason for why we have this craving. This craving doesn't come out of thin air. It's coming from something. There's some reason why. Maybe our self-care has been shot all to hell, or maybe SWCC, stuff we can't control, is way too loud. There's a reason for that craving. So in the process of doing this brain training, it can help with that very basic concept of allowing ourselves to just move from the amygdala back to the prefrontal cortex. That's a pathway that we have probably screwed the pooch on for so long, because we've relied on this amygdala and the insula to grab a hold and do the thing that we needed to do to solve the issue in the moment, which was eat something. And so when you have a craving and you say, wait a minute, I'm having a craving here right now, that's the noticing brain. And you're signaling, I need to do something. And that brain training can really help with that. Any noticing is going to help. But the fact is, you won't have any noticing if you can't get your prefrontal cortex back online. Your brain training won't even happen if you can't get the prefrontal cortex back online. So that awareness is the beginning of it. And that noticing brain, you get curious. You go, oh, wow, why am I doing this? And that curiosity, even if you end up eating, that awareness is going to work. It is going to make a change. It is going to make a shift. Bright line eating ruined eating for me. I don't have the same delight that I used to have for it. I don't have the same interest in it that I used to have for it. I get annoyed with it when it's outside of my feeding window, if you will, or if it's outside of, or something is pulling on me that I don't have, that is not good for me. So your prefrontal cortex needs to come back online in order for you to do the brain training. But if you can think about it for even a hot second, that's the important thing. That's what you're doing, is strengthening that neural pathway, which opens up the prefrontal cortex, which allows you to think again. All right. Any other questions? We good? You got it? I'll go take a nap. Bye, everybody.